Welcome back to the Quanexus podcast where we talk IT. I'm Chuck.
I'm Jack.
We're glad you're back. Hopefully you saw the first podcast on incident response planning. If not, go back and look for that one. Today we're going to talk about cyber threats in small businesses and how small businesses get attacked by cyber threats and the most common vectors we see small businesses get hit by. The above and beyond most common we see is social engineering. So what is social engineering, first of all?
Great question. Social engineering. Social engineering is getting someone to do something they would not normally do. If I walked up to someone, you on the street, and said, "Hey, Chuck, what's your user ID and password to your Amazon account or your bank account?" You would give me some look and think I'm crazy and think something, I might have fallen and hurt myself or didn't take my meds. Besides that, I can craft an email that looks like it came from Amazon or from your bank and make it look totally legit. It will look identical. And it'll say, we need you to log into the site to confirm a transaction that you did, or to confirm a purchase, or we're having a problem with an account. And it looks identical and it feels good. So you think it's probably legit, it looks legit, feels legit, you click on the link, you go to a site, you type your user ID and password in. And then you get a message saying, error, bad user ID or password. What do? You then? You say, take a deep breath, slow down, type your user ID and password in again, and voila, you're now at your bank or you're at Amazon or whatever site you're looking for. What just happened? You just gave a criminal your user ID and password for whatever site that looked like. And there's so much more. What happened is you gave him that, and now you're a person of interest. Now he has that, and he knows that most people are lazy and probably use that user ID and password for many, many other accounts. The concept in security is called password reuse. So because you're a person of interest, we're going to look at where you live, what you do, and see what we can buy, steal, get with that user ID and password. And we'll talk about a few more points that are coming up that will really amplify that at this point.
Yeah, and that password reuse, so not only do you use that password on Amazon, maybe your bank account, but maybe you also use that password at work.
And that is a huge threat. Using personal user IDs and passwords at your business. Your business should have a policy, and it's very hard to enforce, almost impossible, but the policy needs to be there, that anything you use for personal accounts should not be used for the place that you work. They need to be separate. So if your personal ID is compromised, the business that you work for or that you own is still protected from people using that ID.
Yeah, and just to go one level deeper on the social engineering, we're starting to hear about criminals setting up fake LinkedIn accounts and connecting with new employees and really targeting new employees and businesses, posing as IT departments, posing as other people within the company. So they're starting to use LinkedIn, especially while a lot of people are working from home, and connecting with new employees that were just hired. Because, you publish on LinkedIn, I just got this new job, I'm hired at this place, and they're using that to their advantage.
That is growing. And before that, what was going on, and social engineering is, again, getting someone to do something they wouldn't normally do. If you work for an organization, you should not really be talking about your work and what that organization is doing unless that is your job and that is what you're supposed to do. And you're supposed to be using the company system to do that through. If you're implementing some new technology in your business, if we deal with a lot of financial institutions, if you're changing core providers, by putting that out there on Facebook and LinkedIn and all these social media, what the organization's doing, that just makes you and the organization more susceptible to being hacked. Because now they can try to pose as more of a legit criminal to get you to give up your information. Social engineering. Number one way organizations are compromised.
Yeah, by and far, number one. And then number two, we have a brute force attack. And this is also common, definitely second to social engineering, but what is a brute force attack?
Brute force is probably the second most common way organizations are attacked today. Brute force attack is running a program that tries to guess your password. Typically the criminals now have your user ID And once they have that, everybody thinks they're special. Their parents probably told them they were special. But when we choose passwords, we really need to be creative. And easily guessed passwords, a brute force attack will turn up right away. The serious issue here is people are using Gmail for business and with the proper domain name. They're using Office 365. They're using shared type storage in the cloud. Because you're using all these cloud technologies today, your user ID your user ID is being used on all these different platforms, and it's easy for the criminals to go out and try to brute force your password through these online solutions versus everything being like it used to be in one central location that's behind a firewall that's very heavily protected. User IDs are not as protected because of the technology we have. Ways to protect against brute force, it's not that hard. Two-factor or multi-factor authentication, they're the same. Two-factor authentication, multi-factor authentication consists of three things. It's something you are, like a fingerprint, a retina scan, something you know, like a password or a PIN, and something you have, like a cell phone or possibly a token that has numbers that changes occasionally. When you log in to these online services, if you're using two-factor authentication, you then either need to authenticate via thumbprint or through a PIN that was sent to you to verify that it's really you versus someone trying to brute force your account. It's also easy to assume that when you log into a system, after so many logins, you get locked out, which prevents a brute force attack from occurring.
Right, and we see that with like bank accounts. You may have seen that.
And banks do that by default, but a lot of these online services that organizations are signing up for is not on by default, and you actually have to enable it. So there's this false sense of security that you've got these protections on the cloud. Technically, the cloud is just as safe as on-premise solutions as long as the proper security tools are implemented. Just like you implement proper security tools on-premise, on your local server, on your local network, you have different type of security tools that need to be implemented on your online services.
Yeah, and so that's a tool that you need to know exists and turn on.
You need to know that you can turn on two-factor authentication. Most cloud solutions support that. And you also need to have failed login attempts and a lockout after 3 or 5 attempts. And you lock out for 5 minutes, 30 minutes, whatever your organization policy says.
Good. All right. So now we're going to talk about the result of these compromises, right? And the most common one that we hear about is ransomware, which basically means the criminal is taking something hostage and asking for money. So they may be encrypting the file. They may be stealing the files altogether. But they are in control of the information and want money to unlock that information.
They want to extort money from you.
Right.
And so you hit it. Ransomware is typically they encrypt your files. And in order to get your data back, you have to pay them, and they will give you either the decryption key or they'll set the decryption key and give you your files back. Another option to recovering from ransomware is recovering from a backup. Having good backups is an excellent solution. The criminals have upped their game here in the last year. They'll go ahead and set the encryption module to encrypt your files, and then they will run backups, many backups, sometimes 30, 50 backups. So if you have multiple backups and you want to be able to recover from those backups, they get overwritten. So you need to have a backup solution that protects against multiple backups being run. And there are solutions, and it's not hard to do. Again, organizations need to be aware there's tools out there and how the criminals are being successful and implementing the procedures and tools to not be a victim to it. Another issue we've seen with ransomware is if you don't agree to pay the money and you do recover from a backup, they oftentimes will tell you that they've actually stolen your data and will release your data.
Right.
We've seen this, not a lot, but we are seeing this more and more. And we've actually challenged the criminal and said, we believe you may have our data, and if you do, we will consider paying you. But please send me a copy, a sample copy, just so I can feel assured that you really have the data. And not once have they ever been able to produce any data saying they've got it and they're going to sell it.
Okay.
So it's a ploy that they're
Sure.
trying to up their game a little bit and bluffing them a
Yeah,
little bit.
call their bluff. And part of the reason we're talking about this for small businesses, or why we're gearing this towards small businesses, is we're hearing a lot about ransomware in these big news stories that are making their way into the normal news cycle, not just the IT news world. But we're also seeing stories of small businesses and cities. So we just did a blog post about a city in Colorado that
Lafayette.
was ransomware, and at a pretty low ransom, considering
That was about 42,000?
45,000.
45,000. Yeah,
It
pretty
wasn't
low.
millions of, but
Exactly.
the other ones we're seeing out there are millions of dollars. And so the criminals are sort of gauging, how much do we think we can get out of this? And it's a decent sized city, but they don't have an IT specialist on staff. If they had some of these tools available to them, maybe they didn't know to turn them on.
We see that quite a bit. And we oftentimes, when we're called in to survey and look at a new prospect's environment to see if they might be a good fit for us, we often find the backups haven't worked for a while. Not all the time, but we do find that backups have failed.
Yeah.
And organizations are under this false sense of security that the backups are automated and they run. Even if the organization was set up, or whoever set them up, to send them a daily email, they got the daily email, and then just because it was always successful and they got tired of looking at it, they stopped paying attention, and they've been notified that it's not working. They're not paying attention to it because it's just one more thing. So this false sense of security that a backup's been installed is working is very false. You need to regularly, daily as a matter of fact, we recommend, verify that the backups run the night before. And quarterly, annually, whatever you're comfortable with, you need to take the backup and actually do a recovery from the backup to make sure that if something bad happens, you can get your systems back online.
That's a good point. So I guess my point is the criminals are looking for these small to medium-sized businesses, small to medium-sized cities that are large enough to have a database and a network, but not really large enough to keep even a single IT person on staff.
Right, and there's solutions for those organizations. Quanexus is one of those solutions. But let's talk about something called an advanced persistent threat versus a small business. Let's talk about big business and small business. Target, Neiman Marcus, the huge companies of the world, Equifax, everybody seen in the news. There are people that get up every day and go to work, and their job is to hack these organizations. Nobody's waking up in some foreign country, opening a map, an atlas, turning to the US, turning to Ohio, getting down to Centerville. There's this company called Quanexus. I'm going to hack them today. It's not happening. It's not happening to any small business. What is happening is the criminals are developing tools. They're going out there and looking for what I call low-hanging fruit. These tools are just scouring, looking for front doors that are open to a business network. And if they find a front door open, a screen pops up at a hacker's desktop that's owning and running the tools and says there's a front door open here, and they get to work and see how far can they get. What can they get into? Can they get your data? Can they encrypt your data? They don't typically want to work that hard. So that's why ransomware is so popular. So you just get into the system and get through your whatever security levels you have and encrypt it, they're done. They're happy just trying to extort that money. And the reason it's so prolific is because it works.
Right.
And they're making lots of money. And it might be 1 out of 100, 1 out of 1,000, but there's still a lot of organizations out there, and it works.
So after ransomware, what are the next most common incidents that companies are seeing?
Cato and BCE. What does that mean? Cato stands for Corporate Account Takeover. BCE is Business Email Compromise. They're essentially the same. What has happened here is someone has taken over an account that you own. Business email compromise means they've taken over your email account. Corporate account takeover typically means they've gone into possibly your banking account. And they've got your user ID, password, whatever they need to be able to control to do ACH wires and different type of transfer, create payroll transactions and send checks to people all over the world. If you're dealing with any kind of a bank, nowadays when you open up a business account, you are signing a document acknowledging that you understand CATO, corporate account takeover, and why it's important to keep your information that you use to access the bank account separate. We talked about password reuse. When you're using online banking services, especially online banking services, you should have a unique user ID and password to do that to prevent CATO. The other one is business email compromise. This is huge. We talked about all these online services. Office 365, Gmail are the two biggest email platforms that are out there if you're not hosting an email solution in-house. Because they're online, anybody can access or try to access a Gmail account or an Office 365 account just by knowing your email address. They're sitting out there. We talked about that a few minutes ago. They're online, and how do you prevent that? You have to enable, actually go in and set, not always on by default, login attempt failures. After so many login attempt failures, you turn it off and enable two-factor or multi-factor authentication. An example of business email compromise, someone actually accessing your bank account and sending a wire transaction. And we've seen this quite a bit, and this is ramping up. Someone will intercept an invoice that is intended for somebody, and this is big if your organization wires payments to your vendors. Intercepted this email, then forwarded the email. And the way they were able to intercept it is they had an online Office 365 account for their email. They didn't have lockout, they didn't have two-factor. The owner got a brute force, and the criminals were able to sit in his account until they saw something interesting come across. When that interesting $32,000 invoice came across, they forwarded it with different wire instructions. The owner of the company went ahead and wired the payment to the criminals. And they had cyber insurance. It was a sad story. We also have examples of stories that had happy endings with cyber insurance, but we'll leave cyber insurance for another video.
Yeah, and so the end result of this is the owner signed the invoice and sent the money to the criminals, not knowing that they changed out the invoice number.
And that was the right.
Yeah.
And the criminals got it. They were not able to recover because it was an intentional act. The insurance didn't cover it. We'll talk about cyber insurance in another video.
Another day.
Yes. Then you asked me about what else an organization. Well, after CATO and BCE, business email compromise, the next thing you may experience is theft of data, exfiltration. Someone has actually stolen your data. What can they do with it? Criminals are always looking for a way to monetize. Every bit of data has some value. Data that has a lot of value, credit card information, not as much as it used to, but still has value, and credit card fraud is still very high. Credit card companies, the PCI, payment card industry, data security standard, has gotten and evolved to the point where credit cards are fairly well protected. The next biggest thing is just the theft of PHI, which is health information, personal health information. Medical fraud. As credit card fraud starts rolling down, medical fraud has been ramping up hugely. So medical information, which is covered under HIPAA, is becoming a very high value target. And data in general, email lists, big email lists especially, have value because we all get these unsolicited emails, and where are they coming from? They're coming from stolen email lists, probably.
Right. Yeah, and we're seeing a lot of news on the health industry getting hit even harder with the pandemic, with the extra stress
Oh.
that they're under, and criminals are taking advantage of that and socially engineering, hospitals and,
Right.
and this kind of stuff.
Speaking of the pandemic, I'm glad you brought that up. In Ohio, and I'm sure in many other states, a lot of people expecting to get their unemployment checks have not been getting unemployment checks because of fraud. The state of Ohio had a huge list of suspected fraudulent accounts, which also swept out a lot of legitimate people. Ohio has stopped sending out a fair amount of unemployment checks because of fraud. Something else Ohio has done is they've gone to payment cards. So you don't even need to transfer money. They don't need to transfer money to the bank. They just transfer it to a card. So once you've created this fraudulent or stolen someone else's ID and you have that card, money doesn't go into a bank account. Money goes to a card, payment card. You take it anywhere, and they made it easy for it to spend, which hence made it easier for criminals to get access to.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So the card just gets filled up every week, and
The criminals have a good time, but then the state cracked down, and now legitimate people who need
right.
their unemployment checks aren't getting it because the state's going through a verification process.
Got it. So another part of business email compromise that we see are vendors that a company might work with, or someone in your email list that you contact a lot throughout your work. Either they get compromised and you're getting a strange email from a vendor that's phishing for your information, or the other way around. If a company gets hacked, then the hackers can use the email information that you have to try to hack your vendors or the people you work with.
Great point. Something we've seen, not a lot, but this does happen, is your organization has been hacked and you don't know it. And you actually find out because one of your vendors or one of your customers calls you and says, why is our network getting attacked from your network?
Or why am I getting
These
strange
emails from your people asking me to do things I shouldn't do.
Right.
Because the criminals inside your network, and they're exploiting your system to attack other networks. You don't even know you've been breached. And while we've not seen this a lot of breaches that do occur out there, the organization doesn't know they're breached, and the way they find out is through an outside agency letting them know that they've been breached.
With all the threats that we're seeing and that we've talked about today, we're seeing in the news, we're hearing about what's Quanexus's process to defend against these threats.
Over many years, we've developed what we call our Q stack. And I use the analogy of how do we protect our assets at home? After all, the data has the value. Computers are just computers. It's the information that's valuable. Just like our house. We have a house and we have assets inside the house. How do we protect those assets? We lock the front door. Do we think anybody's going to be walking down the street today, tomorrow, next week and checking the front door to see if it's open? We don't believe that's really going to happen. It could happen, but we lock the front door anyways, just in case. We want to keep the bad guy out. What do we do and how do we prepare for if the bad guy breaks in anyways, comes in through the window, bashes the door in, and steals your assets? You have insurance to recover, to be made whole. You need a way to recover. When you look at a network, Quanexus, I feel that the front door is the internet, is the outside, and we lock the front door by putting a firewall in. We keep the bad guy out. Door locked, bad guy doesn't get in. Today's generations, UTM firewalls, next generation firewalls, have a whole host of security tools to prevent bad things from happening. Depending whose report you read, they're 70 to 80% effective at keeping threats out of your network. Good firewalls are an absolute must. 70-80% might not seem like a lot, but it's huge when you consider what could possibly go wrong. Then, again, we have insurance. we need to protect our assets. And if something happens to our assets, we need to be able to recover. The word recover. So to recover from a theft of assets or not having access to our assets, we have a backup solution. We need to be able to recover and get our data back up and running in a reasonable amount of time for our organization so we can deliver goods and services to our client. Then in between that, we have a list of technologies we implement. If you don't leave your money sitting on the kitchen table in a pile, you have it probably in a safe with your jewelry and it's locked up. Safe, jewelry, those are things similar to patch management. We have young people living in our house, kids possibly. We need to train them that they should lock the door. Your users can be your biggest assets or they can be your biggest liability. They know how to properly behave. You want to protect your kids. You know, stranger danger slogan from yesteryear. You know, they need to be aware. So we have training in that stack. Programs are written and operating systems are written with hundreds of thousands of lines of code, sometimes millions of lines of software code. They have two issues. They have stability issues. They don't always do what you want them to do, and they just used to be the blue screen of death. Now we have other issues. And they also have vulnerabilities. So vendors push out patches. So we got antivirus, patches, security awareness training, firewall. And at the top of the stack, we have policies, procedures, controls. They define how long a password and how complex a password should be, how often backups should be performed, how often backups should be protected. Do not use passwords that you use personally for your business account. It includes items like making sure failed login attempts, a certain number, disables an account for a certain amount of time. Two-factor authentication, these are all policies and controls that need to be put in place. So we have a pretty rigorous set of things. We also have a free cybersecurity checklist on our website. We also have that on a card that we'll send out to you. We have a card that shows what our security stack is, and these are things that many organizations can implement themselves depending on the size of the organization and the industry they may operate in. They will bring us in to assist them with implementing and then maintaining and making sure on a daily basis controls are followed. Firewall logs need to be looked at. Is someone knocking on the back door? Has someone gotten in? Backups, absolutely critical. We have 2 people come in here every day, go through backup logs and make sure that every client's backups run. Again, these are things that many can do for themselves. It is some complex technology. I believe that the model that we built is very affordable compared to having a full-time IT staff or a small to medium-sized organization. We can help with these things. If you do have some IT folks on site and they just need some backup and help, we also assist with that. So we have what's called our key stack, or key security stack, which is our layered security approach. And those cover all the basics to help keep our clients safe. And at the end of the day, what we want to do is the bad guys, small businesses, I mentioned low-hanging fruit. We don't want our clients to be low-hanging fruit. We raise them up, we raise the bar, so when the criminal tools are out there looking, they go right by and go on and find low-hanging fruit.
Elsewhere.
And leave our clients alone, leave us alone. And again, let me wrap up. Bad things can still happen no matter what controls we put in place. Criminals can still get in. We can also have mechanical issues, electronic issues. Systems become unavailable, they flake out, and the backup is how we recover from that. So,
great.
Back to you, Chuck.
And at Quanexus, you call that the Q stack. So if you want to look into that more on the website, look for there are videos on the Q stack, there are blog posts on the Q stack, there's a card on the Q stack. So if this is something you're looking for your business, we have lots of information out there. We hope you are enjoying this new podcast format. We are enjoying putting it together for you. And we think that this more conversational format helps get the information out there more easily. If you are enjoying these videos, please like, comment, and subscribe. And also, please reach out if you have any questions, if you think Quanexus can help out your business, or if you have some ideas for future podcasts, we would love to hear those ideas.
So, on that note, thanks for joining us.
And we'll see you next time.